Welcome to Taxbytes for Expats, the top tax tips you want to know as an expat. The podcast is here to help answer the common queries and concerns expats have when moving to or from Ireland. Complex taxes explained simply. We'll focus on the Irish and international tax issues to be aware of to ensure you save time, money, and stress.
Avoid the hassle of dealing with your bank and transfer online, by app or over the phone or Currencies Direct today. Keep listening for an exclusive offer for Taxbytes for Expats listeners, and thanks to Currencies Direct for their support of this podcast. Hi everybody, welcome to this episode of Taxbytes for Expats. Today we are joined by Sarah Owen, who is a project leader with Crosscare Irish Diaspora Support Project, which is a Dublin-based non-profit funded by the Government of Ireland. The aim is for them to provide information and advocacy assistance to Irish citizens moving abroad and those who are also returning to Ireland, all with a particular focus on supporting people who are marginalised and in crisis situations upon return. Sarah herself is a dual Irish and French citizen, and she has lived experience of emigration. She has worked in the areas of Irish diaspora support and engagement for almost 15 years, and she's passionate about supporting people to make informed migration decisions. So I think it's great to have you on the podcast, Sarah. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Steph. It's a pleasure to be here.
Great to be able to talk to you, and great to be able to talk to somebody as well who's involved in such important work, which I think many of our listeners would be really interested to hear what you have to say about your experiences and the services that are available. But we'll go through all that in time, maybe just kind of to kick off. Could you tell us a little bit about your own background and what led you to this role of kind of working with the Irish diaspora?
Yeah, of course. I mean, in the beautiful introduction that you gave me, you touched on it a little bit. I'm a child of multiple diasporas. I grew up in Kenya, in East Africa, to an English father and a French mother. And I lived out there till my early teens, and then I moved to Britain, and I lived in England for 4 years. And then I decided, you know what, let's go to Ireland. And that was supposed to be for 6 months. And here I am more than 22 years later.
Wow.
I have a little boy who's Irish. Ireland is home now, you know. So I suppose just as part of my own journey and the fact that, you know, I suppose I would say I'm quite a privileged migrant, you know. I was able to come to Ireland, get a job, integrate here, and I always leaned towards the non-profit sector. And I suppose my idea had been to go back to Kenya eventually and to work in sort of development fields. But I in 2012, I started an internship with Crosscare, and it was supporting political participation of migrants in Ireland. And I just sort of fell in love with the work. And then when an opportunity came to work with the diaspora part of the project, I jumped at it. And so I've done a number of roles in the project. I've done frontline work, I've done policy work, I've done a lot of outreach, and now I'm managing the project. And I would say, look, there's a lot of trends that have changed over the years, but ultimately the heart of what we do is still the direct support for people. And I think at a time where we're all sort of communicating through screens and, you know, the increase of AI and so on, it's still really important to have that personal touch, that human connection. And it's really important in what we do. And I think that's what keeps me passionate about the work, you know, the fact that I can see the impact that we have. And I work with a fantastic team as well, so that helps.
And that actually leads me quite nicely to my next question, which is what does the support project do? And, you know, who are the people who are typically reaching out for support?
Yeah, no, you gave us again a great introduction around that. But so ultimately we're funded by the Irish government to provide support to people who are both leaving the country by way of information. It's mainly online nowadays. You know, someone moving to Australia might be looking to connect in with a group in Australia. We have contact details on our website for support organizations abroad. But also, you know, for a first-time immigrant, trying to demystify some of the immigration process. So, you know, you're going on a working holiday. What does that look like? Where can you go to? And then on, I suppose, the flip side, the rest of the work is really around providing support to people who are returning. And they might be returning in a planned way. So you might have someone in New York who wants to know about how to get a Irish passport or PPS number for their child born over there because they're moving back home. They're moving to Mayo or something. Or indeed, you might have someone who is being deported from somewhere in Southeast Asia and is going to be coming back homeless, and is going to need to engage with statutory services. So it's really quite a broad range, I suppose, the work that we do. But there's sort of three main areas. So the Irish diaspora support, which I've given you a few examples there, is at the heart of everything. And then on top of that, we do policy and research work. So identifying trends as they arise on the front line and engaging with policymakers and trying to remove administrative barriers, particularly for people who are returning in difficult circumstances, trying to make things easier for people rather than to make them jump through more hoops. It's something that we really, we feel is really important, particularly at a time where, there are a lot of people emigrating, but there's still quite a lot of people moving back to Ireland.
Mm.
And then the other thing that we do is outreach. So I mentioned there Irish organizations around the world, but the Emigrant Support Program, which funds us, is a fund that was established back in the early 2000s and has funded over 900 organizations around the world to provide some kind of supports or services to Irish citizens abroad. And we've been networked in with those groups. So as an example, it might be an Irish dancing group in Sydney. It might be a language group in Belgium, or indeed it might be an Irish welfare organisation providing lots of support to, say, older Irish immigrants in London. There's a real spread of the type of organisation that exists, and we're very fortunate, I suppose, to be part of that network. I suppose we're also part of a much larger organisation, so we're a small project based in Dublin. We're 3 people, but the organisation Crosscare itself has about 500 staff and works across social services across the Greater Dublin region. So it's things like food services and cafes providing healthy meals for a small amount. It's youth clubs all around Dublin. It's homeless services with accommodation. It's counselling services, gambling support services. So we're really well situated, I suppose, in terms of our overseas networks, but indeed the larger organization which we're part of. And the ethos of the organization is really around helping those who need the most support. And I think that's very much what we do. To give you an idea, so last year we would have worked with over 1,500 people, and that's Irish citizens and their family members who are either emigrating or returning. As I said, it's mainly return where we're seeing the sort of crisis cases, but at the same time, it's both for people emigrating and people returning that we focus on.
And what kind of changes or patterns have you seen in the last few years in terms of people returning to Ireland and people leaving? Because you've mentioned, obviously, you guys are at the front line of kind of monitoring those movements.
Yeah, I suppose the last 10 years I think it's fair to say the last 10 years have been a bit bonkers just in society in general, right? And there's been so much change. I mean, we had the pandemic, we've had things like Brexit, we've had the change of administration in the US, we've had the rise and unfortunate rise of conflict around the world. And I think we're all sort of navigating those changes, right? So why should immigration and migration be any different? At the start of the pandemic, we would have seen a real spike in people returning to Ireland. And those would have been people who, say, were on a temporary immigration permission abroad or had lost their job abroad, or indeed were coming back to be closer to family members at a time that it felt like the world was sort of ending. And then post-pandemic, we saw an increase then, and we're still seeing an increase in particularly younger people emigrating. There's obviously push factors. I mean, things like the housing crisis, cost of living can't be underestimated as push factors. But there's also, I suppose, the fact that generation hadn't been able to go and have, the adventure, see the world, do what the Irish do best, in terms of traveling and emigrating and connecting with people outside of Ireland. So there's been a real spike, I suppose, in people particularly going to Australia, but also places like Canada. The other thing I suppose we've seen is movement to places where, English isn't the first language. There's still obviously movement to traditional destinations like the UK, our closest neighbour. But it is harder to get into some of the traditional destinations like the USA, for instance. So we've seen a move to places like the UAE, and obviously there's been a large Irish population out in the Gulf states who are now potentially looking at moving back to Ireland because of what's happening out there. So it's hard to sort of look at 10 years because so much has happened,
So much has changed.
Yeah.
And now a quick word on our episode sponsor, Currencies Direct. If you're looking for a fast, easy way to transfer money to or from Ireland without the hassle and cost of dealing with your bank, keep it simple with Currencies Direct. Whether you're buying property or require regular currency transfers, Currencies Direct can help you save money. As a special offer for our listeners, when you use the link in the show notes and quote expat taxes when registering with Currencies Direct, you'll receive a €50 one-for-all or Amazon voucher when you transfer €5,000 or more in your first 6 months with Currencies Direct. Registration is quick and easy, and you decide how you transfer 24/7 via their online money transfer service, over the phone with one of their friendly experts, or by using their handy mobile app. Check the show notes or head to currenciesdirect.com to register, and thanks to Currencies Direct for the support of this podcast. And yet, the funny thing is that irrespective of those changes, the lived experience of somebody who comes back probably hasn't changed very much, because returning home is difficult, it's challenging. And I suppose, do you see sometimes that maybe there's an assumption that when somebody comes back to Ireland, well, it's obviously going to feel familiar and it'll all be easy? Is that always the case? What do you see practically when people navigate this?
I think this is an area that there has been a little bit of change in terms of how people perceive things in Ireland. I think it's now fairly understood that there are going to be some challenges that people face. But I think the thing is that sometimes people aren't really aware of exactly what might be the pinch points when they're coming back. So there's definitely more awareness than there would have been, say, 5, even 10 years ago around return migration, not just being a reverse of emigration, right? It's so much more than that. And the idea of it being re-emigration, that you've changed when you come back to the country's changed. Coming back to Ireland for Christmas and spending time with all your loved ones and family and friends and everyone dropping everything for you is totally not what it's like if you're moving back permanently. In fact, sometimes people comment that they see their friends and loved ones less now that they live in Ireland than when they were abroad, So I think there's more awareness that there are challenges there, but I think things still come as a surprise for people. And that can really depend on where they've been, how long they've been away, and how connected they've stayed to Ireland as well. It would be unusual for us to encounter people who weren't aware of the housing crisis, for instance, right? Mm-hmm. Most people would know about that, but they might think if they're making a planned return, it might not necessarily impact them. So, if they're coming back and they want to buy property or, they're in a fortunate place where they can do so, even then, I think people are a bit surprised at the fact that it can take longer than they anticipated, right?
And what kind of support do you guys provide there? Is it information service?
Absolutely, yeah. So we're part of an ecosystem of organisations in Ireland who provide information on the return side of things. So in recent years, citizensinformation.ie have a new section on their website that's called the Returning to Ireland portal. And there's really detailed information there around, helping someone plan their return. There's also our partners over in Mayo, Safe Home Ireland, who do very similar work to ourselves. And I suppose we're all singing off the same hymn sheet, if you like. It's really the starting point is information. We don't take the approach, certainly in Crosscare anyway, of promoting or dissuading emigration or return. What we're trying to do is to help people make an informed decision for themselves, right? And so when you have someone making that planned return, sometimes people will turn around and go, you know what, actually, this isn't my time. I'm not going to come back now. And that's perfectly fine because a person has to do what's the right thing for them, And then on the hands-on side of things, in terms of meeting people, advocating on their behalf, that's really people who are coming back who need some kind of support from the state usually. So they might be coming back into homelessness. They might be fleeing domestic violence. They might have left a conflict zone and are looking for work on their return and need to connect in with social welfare support. So, we'd help people fill in their application forms. We would advocate on their behalf if they're coming up against issues. So something that people are often surprised about is just because you're an Irish citizen doesn't mean you have an automatic entitlement to access statutory supports. There are, I suppose, criteria that you have to satisfy. So for things like accessing housing supports, usually have to be on the housing list, or you have to have a local connection to the area. And if someone's been gone for a very long period of time, that's where we come in. We're advocating for the fact that they've been gone, but they're originally from X place. This is their lived experience of being there. And the same thing with social welfare. It's not automatic. So if you haven't lived in the country for at least 2 years. You can't rely on your social insurance contribution. So more than likely you're applying for an assistance-based payment. And for that, you have to satisfy a means test, which, if you've got someone coming back from a conflict zone and they're being asked to provide 6 months worth of bank statements, I mean, you can imagine how that goes, right?
Yeah.
And then they also have to show that they're habitually resident in Ireland. And that can be really difficult for certain groups of people. So for instance, let's say that you're living in the States and you're coming home to care for your elderly father who's taken a fall, and it's all happened really quickly, and suddenly you're in Ireland and you're caring for your parent. It might actually be quite difficult to access something like carer's allowance because you've maintained a center of interest in the States because you're here potentially for a short period of time. So that can leave someone in sort of a difficult position. They might not have access to support. And so we try and advocate on behalf of people. And for the most part, we're successful, but there are some cases that are more difficult than others. I feel like I've spoken quite a lot there, so I'll let you ask the next question.
It's all very useful because these are the things that sometimes, you don't read about them on the information websites. It's experience of working with people. What are the challenges beyond housing that you see people grapple with when they come back, beyond the things you've just mentioned?
So there's a lot of administrative red tape that people find difficult to grapple with. So, I mean, even when it comes to, say, registering with a GP, it might be difficult to register with a GP in the area because they're all oversubscribed. Mm-hmm. Or they might not be familiar with the process of registering a child in school and how that might work. And again, a lot of schools are operating waiting lists, for instance. So there isn't that sort of, yes, that's it, you've applied to the school, right, now you're getting in. The same thing with, supports for people who are, say, returning with a loved one who has a disability or needs some kind of care, trying to look at, I suppose, what exists for them. It can be hard to sort of find that information out and navigate, depending on a person's circumstances, all of that whilst also returning. It's quite a lot, Mm-hmm. And I think no matter if someone is making a planned return or is returning in more difficult circumstances, there's always that sort of reverse culture shock, right? And that comes really unexpected for people. They know it's going to be different to immigration, but I think it surprises them that now it feels like the life that they've had elsewhere, they almost don't have permission to talk about it. We often hear people going, I feel more American than I do Irish when I'm back in Ireland, but when I'm in America, I feel more Irish than I do American, right? Mm-hmm. So it's that piece that comes with migration, a sense of belonging. And one of the things that we try and encourage people to do is to sort of get to know Ireland again, Yeah. If in their power, go around, see the country, get excited by what's happening. Having to rebuild social networks and professional networks can come as a surprise to people. And it can be harder because I suppose, take the example of someone who left Ireland at 22 and went to Australia on a working holiday. And they're now coming back at 35 with 2 children in tow and an Australian partner.
Yeah.
That's a very, very different, I suppose, social network that you're going to build there, right? You're also very different as a person, and the things that you're connecting in with in terms of the state, but in terms of society in general, you're at a completely different level to when you left, So I think, it can take time for people to adjust to life back in Ireland. And even once they're through the red tape piece and the dust is settled and they're living somewhere and they've got employment, there's still that piece of identity and belonging that takes a little bit longer for people to adjust to.
I often read on some of the forums, people saying things like, we've been back 6 months or we've been back 9 months and we just can't settle. And, just even from our own experience, I recall not feeling settled at that point. And that was obviously just my experience. But would you observe that it can take people longer than they think to feel like, oh, this was the right decision?
Absolutely. I mean, I think, listen, the first year is all about that, sometimes longer for people. I've met people who 2 years down the line are going, it's only now that I'm starting to feel at home again. And part of that is all the things I mentioned, but part of that is also the yearning for the life that had been, we all tend to look at things through rose-tinted spectacles. So when you're abroad, Ireland, you're looking at it in this sort of romanticized way. But when you're back in Ireland, maybe you're looking at your old life and going, actually, there was things about my old life that I really miss.
Yeah.
So there's a grief within that as well that I think doesn't really get named. But absolutely, I have never met anyone who's been back and after a month is like, right, I'm here. And if they're saying that's the case, then I'm expecting the few months' time where it's like, oh yeah, I didn't think that I was needing to adjust, but there are things I need to look at.
Thanks for listening to Taxbytes for Expats. Please do leave a rating or review wherever you listen to your podcast. And as always, remember to take professional tax advice specific to your personal circumstances before acting or refraining from action in connection with the matters dealt with in this series. The material in this podcast is intended to give general guidance only.